Hey there. Tonight, we're not climbing castles or marching through empires. We're crawling into something smaller, quieter, darker. A life lived beneath the floorboards, where the walls twitch and the silence has teeth. Because while medieval life was hard for everyone, some had it worse. There was one man rarely thanked, never hugged, often spat on, who spent his nights knee-deep in rot, scratching through shadows, hunting things that squealed. No, he wasn't cursed. He was hired. Tonight's bedtime story is about the rat catcher, a real job in the Middle Ages that was so filthy, lonely, and quietly heroic. It makes grave digging seem like a promotion. So before we sink into the crawl spaces of history, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if this kind of sleepy storytelling speaks to you. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now get cozy, dim the lights, and maybe tuck your feet in a little tighter under covers, because tonight we're going where the rats live. Let's begin. You were never meant to be anyone's favorite son. The baker's boy got fresh bread in the morning. The blacksmith's lad had calloused hands and pride in his shoulders. And you? You got fleas. You weren't born into a trade. You were born into a stench. Before you could walk, you crawled through sawdust and waste. Not because you were curious, but because the rats were already there, and someone had to notice them first. Congratulations. You're a rat catcher now. You didn't choose this. The job came to you like a cough that never left. Passed down through bloodlines no one traced proudly. You were a second son, or worse, the only one. Too frail to wield a sword, but too stubborn to starve. So when the rats chewed through the town granary again, your father handed you a club with a rusty nail in it and said, "Start with the corners." That was your inheritance. A blunt weapon, a half-full sack, and a reputation that stuck harder than plague scabs. There was no guild for your kind. No banner. No crest. No prayers offered before work. The townspeople needed you, but they did want to know your name. To them, you were more pest than protector, more tolerated than trusted, a necessary discomfort. They called for you only when the scratching got too loud to ignore. When things began to vanish, grain, scraps, pets, infants swallowed whole in the night by 100 hungry mouths. Then, and only then, they would whisper, "Send for the rat catcher," as if saying it aloud might invite something worse. Your father taught you to trade the way other men taught fishing or farming, through silence, scars, and occasional grunt of approval. There was no formal training, just trial and error and blood. He taught you how to listen not for footsteps, but for gnawing, how to spot droppings the size of seeds in the corners of a thatched roof, how to trap them with bait that stank enough to make your eyes water, but not theirs. You learned to kill quickly, but not cleanly. Rats don't die politely. They squeal, they writhe, they bite through gloves and chew through wood. Sometimes they scream like children. And the worst part? Sometimes children screamed like them. You stopped noticing the difference. Your hands got used to being bitten. Your skin to the burning itch of infection. Your eyes to the darkness under the floorboards. And your ears, well, they never got used to anything. Because once you've heard rats in the walls, you start to hear them everywhere, even when they're gone. The town never saw your wounds. They didn't ask why your fingertips were swollen, or why your sleeves were always rolled down. To them, you were already contaminated, a walking disease vector with boots full of mud and eyes that had seen too much. When you walked by, people made space, not out of courtesy, but out of fear. They thought if they got too close, something might jump from you to them. A flea, a curse, a memory. And still they needed you. When the granary was at risk, when the monastery found droppings near the holy wine, When someone heard a newborn crying and then didn't, they came to you, not with gold, not with thanks, just a look that said, "Do it and be gone." So you did, and you were. The worst days weren't the infestations. They were the silent days, when no one called for you, when you wandered the alleys, sack in hand, knowing the rats were there hiding, waiting, breeding beneath the cobblestones and the floorboards. And yet, no one wanted your help. They only saw the mess when it overflowed. And you always saw it coming. You knew where to look, where they nested, behind the baker's oven, under the church pews, inside the dead mouths of paupers buried shallow in the potter's field. You watched the patterns, learned the paths. Rats were smarter than the priests gave them credit for. They knew where warmth was, where food sat unattended, where no one would check until it was too late. They were survivors. So were you. Your father used to say, "They hate us, boy," because we remind them what's underneath. Underneath their clean linen, underneath the painted walls, underneath the songs and the sermons and the Sunday silences, there were always rats, and there was always someone to chase them. You were the broom they didn't want to see, the trap they didn't want to hear snap, the human version of a warning sign they kept ignoring. Your home was a shed at the edge of town. It leaned sideways, like even the house didn't want to touch the ground it stood on. Inside, a straw mat, a pile of snap traps, a jar of spoiled lard, and a sack that twitched at night even when it was empty. You didn't live in that house. You waited inside it for the next knock, the next scream. The next night someone woke up to find red eyes blinking back at them from the rafters. You were never off duty, because the rats were never done. Sometimes you dreamed of leaving, running off to a bigger town, selling shoes, scribing letters, doing anything that didn't involve stepping over bones. But dreams didn't stick to men like you. The smell followed, the stories followed. The job and its reputation didn't come off with change of clothes. Even if you tried to run, someone would whisper, "That's the rat man." And then the door would close. One night, when the town was too quiet, you caught yourself wondering, what if they loved the rats more than they hated you? Because the rats, at least, didn't judge. They took what they needed. They never lied. They never prayed for your absence. They simply lived, filthy, hungry, relentless. Like you, your father died with a bite wound gone black. 3 days of fever. No priest, no blessing, no grave, just a ditch behind the tanner's yard. You buried him alone. The rats came the next night, as if to say goodbye, or reclaim him. You didn't cry. You didn't speak. You just picked up his stick and went to work. So here you are, years later, back bent, hands raw, stomach gnawing, still catching, still killing, still ignored. You know this town better than anyone. You've seen every floorboard's underside, smelled every basement's shame, heard confessions whispered only in screams behind kitchen walls. You know which families keep food uncovered, which ones lie about seeing rats, which ones will lose a child by winter if you're not sent in soon. And yet, no one invites you to the feast. No one asks how your day was. You're not a man. You're a function. And one day, when you stop showing up, no one will ask where you went, just whether the scratching came back. It always starts the same way. A sound, faint, persistent, wrong. A scratching behind the wall. A scuttle across the beams. A breath where no breath should be. And they call for you. Not loudly, not like they'd call for a priest or a midwife. No, they send a child or a servant to knock on your warped wooden door. They don't make eye contact. They just say, "It's happening again." You grab your sack, your club, the rusted iron jaw trap you hammered back into shape last winter. with a stone and a prayer. You don't ask questions. They don't give answers. Because both of you know this isn't about one rat. It never is. You step into the house. You've seen this one before, maybe once, maybe 10 times. The floor is swept. The bread is warm. The lady of the house crosses herself twice as you pass. You hear it. That scratching. The sound of hunger behind timber. The soft stutter of disease, crawling beneath feet that pretend not to notice. You kneel. You press your ear to the floor. You breathe in dust, mold, rot, and something else. Something alive. You tap the board twice. Wait. There. The silence breaks. A whisper of motion. Then another. Then many. You smile. But it's not joy. It's recognition. Because down there, beneath the polished floors and family prayers, is the real house. The one the rats built. With their tunnels. Their nests. Their rules. You don't belong in the sunlight. Not anymore. Your world is the crawl space. Your truth is under the floorboards. So you lift the plank, not with a tool, but with your bare fingers calloused, cracked, bleeding from old bites that never healed properly. The board groans. The house protests. And the stench rises. Hot, foul, thick with decay. You breathe it in, because you have to. And there it is. Their city, their kingdom, built from trash, dung, scraps of linen, and prayer book pages, with tunnels so narrow even hope would get stuck crawling through. You lower yourself into the dark, slow, silent. No one offers a rope. No one offers to help. This is your world, and you're the only one allowed inside it, not out of honor, out of fear. Beneath the floor, time slows. The noises from above fade to a low, muffled hum. It's just you now. You, your heartbeat, and the countless tiny lives watching you from holes, from shadows, from the nest of broken things. Their eyes shine like beads. Their teeth glint like little knives. And you know in this moment you're not the hunter. You're the intruder. The first trap is simple. Baited with fatback you stole from your own stew pot last night. Set near a nest you knew they'd rebuilt after last week's cleansing. You always leave one open to escape a tunnel out. Let them think they're winning. Then close it after the fifth one runs. That's when the rest are inside. Then, the stick, the club, the wave of your arm, the rhythm of impact. You don't feel proud. You don't feel disgusted. You just feel tired. Sometimes you talk to them. Not loud. Not with words. Just with your breath. Your eyes. Your presence. You tell them, I don't want this either. They don't care. They swarm. You once found an infant shoe in a rat nest. Tiny. Blue. Still laced. You didn't ask how it got there. You didn't return it. You just stared at it a moment longer than usual, and then set it aside like every other piece of evidence no one wanted to admit existed. The crawl spaces are the truth beneath the lie. They show you how people really live, where they hide their sins, where they toss their guilt, coins falling through cracks, scraps of meat maggot-filled, letters burned halfway through and stuffed under stone, and bones, always bones, not always animal. You stop asking questions when you find teeth that look too much like your own. One time, you surface with a rat the size of a loaf of bread clamped between your hands, blood still warm. The housemaid fainted. The father turned green and crossed himself, and the youngest daughter said, "Is it true they eat people?" You said nothing, because what was there to say? You weren't supposed to feel pity for the rats. But sometimes you did. They weren't evil. They were survivors. They scurried in the filth created by the same hands that banish you from dinner tables. They were just hungry. Like you. Like everyone. They just had smaller hands. Above the floorboards, there's a life with rules and titles and sanctified names. Below, there's just the truth, the rot, the gnawing, the endless, crawling hunger. And you? You live between the two, never fully part of either. Too dirty for the priests, too useful to be burned. One day, while clearing a manor basement, you found a nest of over 30 rats beneath a rotted wine barrel. You caught them one by one. Quick, efficient. When you emerged, soaked in blood and mold, the lady of the house pinched your nose and said, "Clean yourself before you touch anything." You looked down at your hands, at the scratches, the gore, the decades of stain that no water had ever removed, and you realized you weren't meant to be clean. You were the stain. Children followed you sometimes, throwing pebbles, laughing, holding their noses, and pretending to gag. You never yelled. You never looked back. But once, you whispered under your breath, "One day you'll call for me, and I'll still come." Because that's who you were. The man they scorned until they needed him. The one who went where no one else dared. The one who cleaned up their nightmares while they closed their shutters and prayed for morning. And the floorboards? They always remembered. They creaked when you left. They wept when you returned. Because no matter how many rats you caught, no matter how many traps you set, there were always more. More tunnels. More nests. More hunger. The rats didn't fear death. They feared absence. That's why they bred. That's why they fought. That's why they lived where no light reached. They were the memory the town tried to drown with perfume and hymns. And you? You were their shadow. The uninvited guest who knew their secrets and carried them, silently, faithfully, underfoot. They say God gives every man a gift. Some get strength in their arms. Some get silver in their tongues. Some get luck. You got a nose. Not a noble nose. Not the sculpted kind that graces portraits or inspires poets. No, yours is crooked, scarred, misshaped from a fight you didn't start, and an infection you couldn't afford to treat. But it works. Too well. You can smell rot before it rises, damp before it pools, and rats before they squeak. They used to laugh at you, the boys in the market, called you names, pinched their noses when you walked past, said you smelled worse than the things you caught. What they never knew is that your nose wasn't cursed because it reeked. It was cursed because it remembered. You could walk into a room and taste the air. Taste fear. Taste mildew. Taste the slow, musty breath of it going soft from within. That's the gift. The burden. You walk past the tavern and know the meat is going to turn by Thursday. You walk past the baker and know the yeast was left too long. You walk past a well and know something has died down there even if no one's found it yet. And they call you strange, unholy, touched, not by angels, but by the underworld. They say your nose is unnatural, that no man should be able to smell things not even dogs can find. But when the rats take root under a nursery or chew through a coffin wall, they knock anyway. You learned early how to track them by scent. Rats are clever, but they're not clean. Their trails carry a signature. A wet, oily stench that clings to walls, foundations, floor beams. A mix of grease, fur, feces, fear. You follow it like a blind prophet, crawling through spaces no priest would dare purify. Your nose doesn't lie. It always finds them. And when it does, they run, but not far enough. The townsfolk never see this part. The way you crouch behind wood piles, face to the wind, sniffing like a hound. The way you walk into homes not with questions, but with one deep breath and already know how many live there, what they've eaten, where the waste is buried, and whether they'll be calling for you again within the month. You read the air like monks read scripture. Every puff of must, every hint of bile or rat urine, Every sour note of plague just beginning to sing. You speak the language of stink, and it speaks back. The smell never leaves you. It's in your hair, your breath, your skin. No matter how many river baths you take, no matter how much lye you scrub into your fingernails, it clings. You try not to notice anymore, but others do. You walk into the tavern, and it's like a spell has been broken. Chatter dies. Mugs pause midair. Eyes slide away. No one says anything. They don't have to. They smell you before you open the door. You ask for ale, they pour it, and place it 2 inches farther from you than usual. You drop 3 coins. They wait until you leave to touch them. Blood money, one whispers. Pest money, says another. You've saved their families more times than you can count. They still won't shake your hand. One night, after clearing out a nest in the church basement, you stood under the bell tower, soaked in sweat and death, and watched the priest walk past without a glance. You had 5 bites on your arm, 1 on your neck. Your shirt was torn, your sack still twitching. The priest crossed himself and muttered, "God be with us." But not with you, never with you. You tried to join them once. The townsfolk tried to sit at the fire, share a laugh, tell the story of the rat the size of a small pig you caught under the granary last winter. But halfway through, you notice the silence, the stiff backs, the eyes not on your face but your hands, and the way the smoke seemed to drift away from you, like even the fire didn't want to share its warmth. You left before the punchline. No one stopped you. Your nose knows more than it should. It knows who's sick before they do. You can smell it, a sweet metallic shift in the breath, the reek of infection rising beneath clean linen, the sour edge of a wound that won't close. Once, a merchant's wife asked you to remove a rat from her parlor. You took 1 sniff and told her she needed a midwife, not for a baby, but for what was coming out of her. 3 days later, they buried her. No one asked how you knew. They just stopped looking you in the eye. People fear what they don't understand, and no one understands your nose. They call it unnatural, witch-born, cursed. You were never tried, never formally accused. But that didn't stop the whispers. Once, a boy went missing after dusk. You were the last one seen near the bridge. They found your sack full, but not with the boy. With rats. Still, they looked at you like you had eaten him whole, as if the stink had possessed you, turned you into something other than a man. And maybe, in a way, it had. You've forgotten what fresh air smells like. Even in the fields, even in spring. There's always something: a rotting stump, a dead bird, a breeze off the latrine trench that never quite goes away. Your nose can't turn off. You envy the others. They walk through life blind to the truth. You see no, smell everything they cover up. Their filth, their waste, their sins, and they hate you for it. You once met a woman in another town, a seamstress. She laughed at your stories, said your voice didn't match your smell. You stayed 2 nights. A miracle, really. She lit lavender under the windows and burned vinegar in the fireplace. Said it helped. Said she liked the way you watched things. But on the 3rd morning, she woke to find you standing barefoot in her cellar, sniffing. You'd caught something. A whiff of damp fur, sour milk bile. A new nest behind her woodpile. She screamed. You left. She never called again. It's hard to explain to someone what it's like, to carry the scent of every room you've entered, to taste mold on the wind, to know a man is dying by the way he smells in the morning. You don't speak of it anymore. No one wants to hear, so you live alone, at the edge of town. As always, among the smells the town can't bear to name. Dead leaves, wet stone, old bread, burnt hair, the iron of dried blood, the strange sweetness of early plague. These are your perfumes. This is your world. And still they call you. Still they knock. Still they whisper. The scratching's back. And you rise. Take your sack. Sniff the wind. And go. Because that's what you do. You walk into places that stink. And make them stop. But when you lie down at night, you don't dream of peace. You don't dream of quiet. You dream of smell. Of bone dust. Of rot. Of milk gone sour in the heat. Of nests under stairs. Of soft, warm bodies twitching in your hands. And worst of all, you dream of clean air. Of what it would feel like to breathe and not know anything. But you never do. Because your nose won't let you. Because you were cursed with a gift. And now it's all you are. They didn't write it in the records, but everyone knew. When the rats came first, the sickness followed. You could count the hours between the two. A nest found in the bakery on Monday. By Thursday, someone would be coughing. By Sunday, they'd be buried. And you'd already be halfway through the next nest. The physicians wore beaked masks stuffed with herbs. Long robes soaked in vinegar. Gloves layered like armor. You wore a shirt with one sleeve torn off. And a sack soaked in blood. They studied symptoms. You cleaned up the source. But guess who they wrote ballads about? No one sang of the rat catcher. They didn't tell stories of how you dragged a dead queen rat from beneath the tavern hearth, only to watch the innkeeper's boys stop coughing the next day. They didn't carve your name on the chapel walls. They didn't even let you enter the chapel. You were too unclean for prayers, too necessary for silence. So they tolerated you like pain, like sewage, like fate. It wasn't that you weren't trying to help. You were. You always had been. You didn't want people to die. You didn't want to wake up and smell fever in the wind. You didn't want to see children's shoes outside closed doors. But you couldn't stop it. Not all of it. Not enough. You were a broom against a flood. One year, the year the rains didn't stop the rats, came by the hundreds. Fields flooded. Homes dampened. Food rotted in the stores. And they arrived, not as a swarm, but as a wave. Black, twitching, wet. You killed them until your arms gave out. You killed them in the dark, in your sleep, in your thoughts. Still they came. By the end of that summer, the graveyard couldn't take another body. They buried people in the same trenches where you dump rats. Sometimes, it was hard to tell which was which. That's when they stopped looking you in the eye altogether. As if you were the one who brought it. As if the rats listened to you, obeyed you, belonged to you. They thought maybe you were cursed. Maybe you were the cause. Because surely no one man could survive so much plague unless he was part of it. And they whispered the old names behind your back. Witch, Hexblood, Devil's Fetch. You didn't argue. What would be the point? The plague wagons rolled through town. You watched from a distance. Always from a distance. They never let you help carry the bodies. Not because they didn't need you, but because they feared what might happen if you touched the living. They trusted you with the dead, but not the dying. The rats, though, they never changed. Still clever. Still hungry. Still fearless. Still the same yellow eyes blinking up at you in the candlelight, unblinking as your boot came down. In a strange way, they were honest. They didn't pretend to be anything but what they were. Unlike the physicians who prescribed prayers while children burned with fever. Unlike the barbers who offered bleedings and leeches while their wives slipped out the back door coughing. Unlike the mayor who banned public gatherings. Right before hosting a banquet, you never lied about your trade. You told people what you found. There's a nest under your child's bed. The pantry's infested. Your well smells of rat piss. They didn't always believe you. Sometimes they begged you to stay quiet, but they always called you back after the sickness came, and they never apologized. Once, During the worst outbreak you ever saw, you were asked to burn an entire block of homes. The mayor said it was the only way. The rats were nesting in the walls, chewing the beams, nibbling on babies' toes. You lit the first fire yourself, watched it climb, listened to the wood scream. Try not to look at the families crying into their sleeves. Afterward, you were paid in silence and ash. There were mornings when the town smelled like fever before the sun even rose. You'd step outside and it was there, a sour with heaviness in the throat. The air tasted yellow. That's when you'd know. Today, you'd find something worse. A child curled beside a rat-chewed loaf. A woman rocking beside a crib that hadn't made a sound in days. A priest who hadn't left his chapel or bathed in a week. You didn't knock. You didn't wait for an invitation. You went in, because that's what you did. That's all you could do. They began to blame the rats less, and blame you more. You were too familiar with death, too efficient, too unfazed. One butcher's wife said she saw you smile after pulling a rat from her chimney. You hadn't smiled. Your face was just stuck like that. But the rumor spread anyway, and from then on, people avoided your eyes altogether. They wouldn't touch your money, wouldn't accept your meat at the market, wouldn't sit beside you at the fountain. Even your shadow made them nervous. You became a superstition, a ghost with a sack, a curse wrapped in leather boots. They carved crosses on their doors after you passed. They whispered prayers when your dog barked. But still, when the plague wagon came again, they called for you. Because the priest wouldn't enter the home. The doctor was dead. The grave digger wouldn't come near it. And you always showed up. Because if you didn't, no one would. Your dog died that winter, bitten by a corner rat the size of a goat's head. You held her as she twitched, spasmed, froth leaking from her lips. You buried her with your hands. No one offered to help. No one came. You lit a candle. And that night, the rats didn't come, as if they understood, as if they respected the silence, more than the humans ever had. You stopped talking after that. Not entirely, just enough. Enough to keep people from growing too comfortable. You realized the only way to survive was to become what they thought you were. Quiet, distant, unfeeling. They wanted a rat catcher? You gave them one. Stoic, efficient, unholy, and they were relieved. It was easier to pretend you were something less than human. Then they wouldn't have to feel guilty. You lived among the sick, but never got sick. Not really. Not like them. You bled. You sweated. You shook at night. But you never broke. And that scared them more than the rats. Because what does it mean to touch death daily and walk away? They thought, maybe you were part of it. Maybe you weren't a man anymore. Maybe you were plague in boots. And still they called you. They didn't build statues for you. Didn't write your name in the guild records. Didn't leave you offerings. They just scratched your door at night with a stick when the squealing started again. And when you answered, they didn't speak. They just stepped back and let you pass. You've saved more lives than you can count. But no one thanks you. Not once. Not properly. They grunt. They nod. They leave a few coins in a bowl like feeding a stray. But no one looks you in the eye and says the words. Because saying thank you would mean acknowledging what you did, what you saw, what you walked through while they stayed clean behind locked doors. And no one wants to remember that. They forget the week after you clean the nursery. Forget the smell that burned their lungs. Forget the scratching under the cradle. Forget the trail of blood and droppings you followed to the wall. You don't forget. You remember it all. The bite marks on the crib. The cold hand of the mother when you touched her shoulder. The look in her eyes, not horror, not rage, just relief. That it wasn't worse. That someone else would clean it up. And that someone was always you. You walked through streets like a shadow. Not fear like a beast feared like a debt, like guilt made flesh. Because every time they see you, they remember something they'd rather forget. That beneath the floorboards, their world is rotting, and you're the only one who deals with it. They tell their children not to stare at you. Then they do it themselves. They whisper that you talk to rats, that you hear them at night, that you feed them in secret, so you'll never run out of work. They say you were born in the gutters, that your mother birthed you in a dung heap, that your father raised you on bones and scraps. They say you can smell death because you carry it. They're not wrong. Once, a boy ran up to you in the street. 5, maybe 6. It was easier to pretend you were something less than human. Then they wouldn't have to feel guilty. You live among the sick, but never got sick. Not really. Not like them. You bled. You sweated. You shook at night. But you never broke. And that scared them more than rats. Because what does it mean to touch death daily and walk away? They thought, maybe you were part of it. Maybe you weren't a man anymore. Maybe you were plague in boots. And still they called you. They didn't build statues for you. Didn't write your name in the guild records. Didn't leave you offerings. They just scratched your door at night with a stick when the squealing started again. And when you answered, they didn't speak. They just stepped back and let you pass. You've saved more lives than you can count. But no one thanks you. Not once. Not properly. They grunt. They nod. They leave a few coins in a bowl like feeding a stray. But no one looks you in the eye and says the words. Because saying thank you would mean acknowledging what you did, what you saw, what you walked through while they stayed clean behind locked doors. And no one wants to remember that. They forget the week after you clean the nursery. Forget the smell that burned their lungs. Forget the scratching under the cradle. Forget the trail of blood and droppings you followed to the wall. You don't forget. You remember it all. The bite marks on the crib. The cold hand of the mother when you touched her shoulder. The look in her eyes, not horror, not rage, just relief. That it wasn't worse. That someone else would clean it up. And that someone was always you. You walked through streets like a shadow. Not fear like a beast feared like a debt. Like guilt made flesh. Because every time they see you, they remember something they'd rather forget. That beneath the floorboards, their world is rotting, and you're the only one who deals with it. They tell their children not to stare at you. Then they do it themselves. They whisper that you talk to rats, that you hear them at night, that you feed them in secret, so you'll never run out of work. They say you were born in the gutters, that your mother birthed you in a dung heap, that your father raised you on bones and scraps. They say you can smell death because you carry it. They're not wrong. Once, a boy ran up to you in the street. 5, maybe 6, covered in soot, grin wide, eyes bright. He said, "Are you the rat man? The real one?" You said nothing. He laughed and ran back to his friends, shouting, "He's real! I saw him. He's real!" Like you were a story. Like you were a nightmare made of blood and sacks and squeals. You smiled just a little, not because it was kind, but because even a child knew what the adults refused to admit. You mattered, even if they hated you for it. They blame you when the plague spreads. Say you didn't do enough, that you missed a nest, that you didn't come fast enough, didn't bring enough traps, didn't burn enough corpses. But they never invite you in fast, never let you start early. Always wait until the scratching turns to screaming, and still when the worst has passed. They blame you because it's easier than blaming themselves. One time, during a feast for the mayor's son, you were asked no, or to clear rats from the banquet hall cellar the night before. You worked 12 hours straight, knee-deep in mold, blood, broken barrels, and bones that didn't all belong to animals. You surfaced at dawn, clothes torn, hands blistered, face lined with filth. You weren't offered a seat, or a drink, or a word, just a coin pouch tossed like garbage into your sack. And when you tried to enter the square that night just to listen to the music, nothing more. The guards blocked you. Not tonight. One said, "We got food out." They want you to be invisible until they need you. Then they want you immediately, but silently, through the back door. Leave no trace. Speak to no one. Don't breathe too loud. And above all, don't linger. You've seen them panic when you touch something. A chair, a doorknob, a cup by mistake. They scrub it after you leave. Sometimes they throw it away, as if your skin leaks something that can't be washed off. And maybe it does, because saving lives has stained you in ways no one else is willing to wear. You're not proud. Not really. You don't need thanks. You don't ask for applause. But some nights, just some, you wish someone would see you. Really see you. Not the sack. Not the blood. Not the boots crusted in sewage. You, the man who hasn't slept more than 3 hours a night in a decade. The man who lost 2 fingers to a nest that no one even believed was there. The man who buried his own dog behind a woodshed while the town lit candles for a merchant's cat. But no one ever does, because they'd have to admit something unbearable, that the man they fear is also the reason they still wake up in warm beds. And that kind of truth doesn't fit in a bedtime prayer. One winter, the sickness came early. So early the fields were still green. You cleared 16 homes in 4 days. By the end, your hands wouldn't close. You sat in your shed, watching frost creep up the window, and thought, if I don't go tomorrow, maybe they'll remember what happens without me. But you went. You always go, because this isn't a job. It's a sentence. And the people who hate you, they're the jury. There's a story about a town that drove out its rat catcher, said he was cursed, said he brought sickness, said they didn't need him anymore. He left. No noise. No fight. By winter's end, half the town was dead, and they still didn't call him back, because pride stinks worse than any plague, and shame is heavier than a sack of corpses. Sometimes you wonder if you vanished, if you disappeared into the woods with your traps and your tools and your useless nose. Would anyone come looking? Would they notice? Would they even know your name? You don't think so. You're not a man to them. You're the sound they hear right after the scratching stops. The smell that says, it's over. The shadow that arrives between the last scream and the priest's knock. You're not salvation. You're the cost of it. And that's why they hate you. Because you remind them of what they owe, what they avoided, what they ignored, what they feared and called unseen until it chewed through their walls. You are the face of the reckoning. The one who answers when no one else will. The one who goes where they won't. The one who holds the line not with sword or sermon, but with sackcloth and scars. And they hate you for it, but they need you more. Your tools don't hang from a leather belt like a knight's sword. They don't gleam in sunlight. They don't inspire awe. They're things that smell before you touch them. Things you mend yourself with twine, nails, teeth, and prayer. Things made not to last, but to kill. You start the day with a bag. Burlap, mildewed, torn in the corners, where rat teeth have chewed their way out too many times. You patch it constantly. You've sewn more into that sack than you ever did into your own clothes. Some holes stay open, not because you miss them, but because they're too soaked in blood to stitch again. It creaks when you lift it. It groans when you walk. And sometimes, when it's full, it twitches. Then there's the stick. Your first one was a broom handle, snapped in half after your father beat a rat to death under a nursery cradle. He gave it to you with no words. Just blood on his hands and sweat on his brow. You carved a nail into the end, bent it like a hook, sharpened it on stone. It never looked like much, but it made killing quiet. That's all it needed to do. You've used other tools over the years. A cage with a false bottom. A spring-loaded jaw trap you bought off a tinker who didn't know what he was selling. A loop of rope with knots in the wrong places. A claw you made from a fireplace poker and desperation. But nothing works better than your hands. Rough, quick, callous from breaking necks and dragging corpses through crawl spaces that even rats hesitate to enter. You don't wear gloves anymore. They got in the way. There's always something in your pocket. Not money that never lasts. Not bread it crumbles and draws them closer when you're trying to stay still. No, your pockets carry dried meat for bait, a wedge of salt, a broken tooth, a little wax plug for your ears when the squeals get too loud, a scrap of cloth that belonged to your dog you can't throw it away, a vial of something that used to be poison but has gone cloudy now. You don't remember where you got it. Sometimes you carry string, not because you need it, but because it feels good to have something to tie in a world that's always falling apart. There's the hook. It hangs from your belt, hidden behind your coat. You made it yourself. Bent it from a horseshoe. Filed it sharp. Attached a leather grip. You use it when you don't want to reach with your hands. When the body is already too soft. When there's too much chewing. The townsfolk once saw you dragging something out of a drain with it. They whispered for weeks. Called it your devil's claw. Said it pulled souls. You let them believe it. Truth is worse. You carry a knife. Small, crude, blackened from flame. Not for rats. For ropes. For sacks. For doors that won't open fast enough. And, if you're being honest, for yourself, just in case. Because some nests are too deep. Some holes close behind you. And no one comes looking. But a real tool, the one that matters, isn't steel or cloth or bait. It's your ears. You listen for things others pretend they can't hear. A rustle behind the cupboard. A shift under the floor. A heartbeat that isn't yours in a cellar with no windows. You can tell the difference between a mouse and a mother rat. Between panic and patrol. Between a sound that means one and a sound that means many. Your ears are trained like a soldier's sight, like a blind man's hands, like a priest listening for lies. And then there's your nose, your curse gift. We've talked about it before. But here's the truth. Your nose is your compass, your calendar, your confession booth. You sniff once. You know where to go. Sniff twice. You know how deep it runs. Sniff 3 times. You know whether to leave your name scratched on the door in case you don't come out. It's not a talent. It's a punishment. But it works. There's another tool. The one no one sees. The one they think you lack. Hope. Not the kind they write poems about. Not faith or glory. Yours is smaller. Bent. Half crushed, like everything you carry. But it's still there. The hope that this nest is a last. That this child won't die. That this sack won't be too heavy. The hope that maybe someday someone will say, he mattered. Hope keeps your hands from shaking when the rats bite. Keeps your feet moving when the scratching gets louder. Keeps your eyes open when you find the bones of something that shouldn't be there. It's not the loud kind of hope. It doesn't shout or shine. It's quiet. Like a breath held, like a prayer not meant to be heard. And that makes it the strongest tool of all. You've tried to replace your tools. Once, a rich merchant gave you a metal trap forged by some northern blacksmith who swore it was rat-proof. It snapped shut on your hand the first time you tried it. You threw it in the river. Good riddance. You don't need clever. You need familiar. You need things you can fix with fire and grit and cloth torn from your own sleeve. You need tools that survive just like you. Every item you carry tells a story. The bag? Your father's. The knife? Found beside a boy's bones. The hook? Bent in the fire when you were too angry to sleep. The claw mark on your wrist? A rat that refused to die. The tooth in your pocket? Yours. Lost when a nest collapsed and you slammed your face into stone. You could build a whole history just from what you carry. You have, because no one else remembers it for you. You don't sharpen your blade unless it dulls. You don't polish your tools. You don't hang them on display. You carry them, clothes, dirty, stained, because that's what they are. Not ornaments, not legacy, just extensions of your hands. Your will, your silence, and in the end, they'll bury you with them. Or they won't. Maybe they'll burn your shed, salt the floor, say it's better not to risk whatever was left behind. But your tools will remain. Somewhere. In ash. In mud. In memory. Waiting for the next man foolish enough to answer the scratching. The plague doesn't knock. It creeps. Slithers. Waits. It curls beneath the floorboards, silent as sleep. Hums in the walls where warmth lingers. Settles in the dark where no one dares to sweep. It doesn't announce itself with horns or thunder. It doesn't scream down the streets like war. No, it starts with a sound, a smell, a silence that feels too still. And by the time someone notices, it's already moved in. You, though, you knock. You always knock. Even if they call for you. Even if they begged. Even if you smell the death from the front step and know no one inside will answer, you knock anyway. Out of habit, out of decency, out of some strange, stubborn ritual that says even a rat catcher announces his arrival. Even if death doesn't, you stand on their threshold sack in hand, stick slung over your shoulder, and wait. Sometimes you hear weeping, sometimes prayers, sometimes nothing. Sometimes the rats answer first. A squeal, a scratch, the soft patter paws on cold stone. Your greeting. The door creaks open. A face peers out pale, hollow-eyed, shaking. Not from fear of you, from fear of what you've come to see. They step aside. No words. They never have the strength for words anymore. You step in. The door shuts behind you like the lid of a coffin. Inside, it's the same story told in different voices. A family of 4, now 3, or 2, or maybe just one too fevered to know if the others are alive or sleeping forever. You walk past overturned chairs, blankets crusted with sweat, food untouched, air that tastes like spoiled milk and something far worse. And always, you hear them. The rats. Not panicking, thriving. They don't run anymore. They don't need to. They've learned that plague makes people slow, weak, blind. They take what they want. Bread, bone, breath. They nest under deathbeds and chew through the hems of shrouds. They eat the corners of holy books, the tips of fingers. You've seen it. You've seen everything. You move room to room, not as a hero, not as a mourner, just as the man they called. You lift floorboards, pull back drapes, check corners with steady hand and a stomach long since steeled. You set your traps even when you know they won't be emptied, because setting them is all that's left to do. Sometimes you find a mid-meal, eyes bright, bellies fat, faces buried in flesh that once whispered prayers. You don't flinch anymore. You can't afford to. You clear them, one by one, quickly, quietly. You do the work no priest can bless. The family doesn't watch. They sit on the stairs, or huddle in the barn, or lie in the next room, sweating through their last hours. They know you won't speak. They prefer it that way. Words rot in plague houses. Only actions remain. You leave your traps behind. They always do better without you near. Sometimes you return the next day. Sometimes the next week. Sometimes there's no one left to unlock the door. You go in anyway, because no one else will. You've learned to hold your breath for long stretches. to press your tongue against the roof of your mouth to stop gagging, to keep your hands steady even when you find the cradle has been empty far too long. You don't cry. Not anymore. Tears draw flies. Once, you entered a house and found no rats at all, but the family inside was dead. All of them. Faces twisted, hands clutching rosaries, candles long melted into puddles of wax. There was no sound, except the flies. You looked around, took a breath, and knew the rats had already come, feasted, left, full in content. You were too late. Again, you buried them yourself. One by one, no rites, no ceremony, just earth and silence. And after the last one, you dug a little deeper, set a trap in the pit, covered it in straw, just in case. Because rats always come back. Sometimes they tell you to burn the house. And you do, because you've seen what happens when they don't. Rats live in ash, in soot, in memories that refuse to die. Fire is a cruel kindness. You light it. You stand until the roof collapses. You watch the smoke rise. And then you leave. No one thanks you. No one offers you water. Not even a glance. Just the wind, whispering of the next house. You once knocked on a door and were met with a blade. The father shouted that you weren't needed, that everything was fine, that no one inside was sick. You nodded. You stepped back. And 2 days later, the house was silent. The door swung open with a breeze. The rats didn't bother hiding. You didn't knock that time. You simply walked in. Every town has a map in your mind, not of streets, of plague. You mark the ones already touched, the ones on the verge, the ones pretending they're safe because no one started coughing yet. You don't judge them. Denial is its own kind of faith. But you knock anyway, because someone has to, because death doesn't. They call you plague bringer. They say you follow sickness like a shadow. Say your arrival is the omen. That rats come where you go. They're not wrong, but not how they mean. You don't bring it. You follow it. Like a man chasing fire with a bucket of dirt. You never arrive first. Only after. Always too late. Never early enough. Some of them beg you to lie. To tell them it's not plague. That the rats mean nothing. That the fever is just from bad meat or too much sun. You want to. You really do, but lies won't save them. So you say nothing. You just set your traps, check your sack, and knock on the next door. Children learn your knock. Some cry, some run, some hide under beds that creak with more than wood. You hear them whisper stories about the rat man, the one who comes when the world is sick, the one who never smiles, the one who carries death in his bag. They don't know your name, but they know your sound. You've knocked on more doors than you've opened for yourself, and each one echoes. A memory, a warning, a promise. You knock like a priest without a prayer, like a doctor without a cure, like a man with nothing left but duty. And still you knock. The plague doesn't ask permission, doesn't wait for your readiness. Doesn't care if it's your sister, your friend, your favorite tavern keeper. It comes anyway. And when it does, you follow with a sack, a stick, a nose that knows too much, and a knuckle calloused, cracked, raised to the next door. Because that's who you are. Not the cause. Not the cure. Just a man who shows up after the scratching starts. And knocks when no one else will. Children always find you first, not with eyes, with instinct. They don't know what you do, not really, but they know you don't belong. You walk by and they pause their games. Marbles stop rolling, sticks lower, whispers flutter between dirty fingers like curses past in secret. And then the laughter starts. Not cruel, not yet. At first, it's nervous, curious, half hidden behind crooked teeth and patchy scarves. They point. They call you names. Ragman. Mud Eyes. Rat Boy. They run alongside you for a few steps. Mimic your limp. Pretend their sack is twitching too. They don't mean harm. They mean to survive. And mocking you feels like power. You don't respond. You keep walking. You've learned not to flinch, not from stones, not from spit, not from laughter too loud for a cold morning. You've seen what happens when you react. You become real. And that frightens them more than anything. So you let them laugh. You let them point. You let them believe they're safe. For now. But the mothers? They know better. They watch from doorways, behind laundry lines, through cracked shutters. Their eyes narrow as you pass. Not in fear. In blame. They spit when you're near onto the ground, into the wind, sometimes into your path. They mutter prayers. They clutch charms. They pull their children closer. Not because they think you'll hurt them, but because they know what follows you. What always follows you. They've buried neighbors after your visits. Buried husbands. Buried sons. Some think it's you, not the rats, that brings the sickness. They say your hands are stained with death. That you carry it in your sack, loose and twitching. That your boots mark which homes are doomed. Once, a woman threw a bucket of lye at you. Missed by inches. Hit your coat. You didn't react. You just walked on. But later that night, you left a trap at her doorstep. Empty. Just wood and wire. No bait. No purpose. Just a reminder. You've seen what fear does to people. How it curdles into cruelty. How it sharpens like a knife when it needs someone to point at. And you're always visible. You don't have the luxury of fading into the crowd. You smell wrong. You dress wrong. You walk like someone who's been crawling for too long. You're easy to blame. Easier than fate. Easier than God. Easier than accepting that rats don't knock and plague doesn't ask. But not every child laughs. Some stare. Quiet. Still. Too thin for their age. Too old in the eyes. You see them hiding behind barrels. Peeking from windows. Gripping dolls whose eyes are missing or sewn shut. They watch you, not with fear, with understanding. They've heard the scratching. They've seen the blood. They know the weight of silence when their mother won't wake up. These are the ones who don't run. These are the ones who open the door before you knock. You once found a boy sleeping in a nest. Not a real one. A place where rats had nested, long since cleared. He curled into it like a womb. Said it was quiet there. Said it didn't smell anymore. You let him stay. For a while. When he left, he took one of your broken traps. You didn't ask why. Sometimes they follow you. Kids. Not often. Just the bold ones. The lonely ones. They trail you through alleys, past gutters, into fields. They ask questions. How many rats have you killed? Have you ever been bitten on the face? Is it true they can talk? You answer only some of them, not to be rude, but because too much truth turns their curiosity into silence, and you'd rather hear them ask than cry. There was a girl once, shoes too big, scarf too tight. She followed you for 3 days, didn't speak once, just watched. You let her. On the 4th morning, you found her sitting on your stoop, shivering. You handed her a piece of bread and asked her name. She didn't give it. She just said, "I saw them eat my baby brother's face." You nodded. You didn't say, "I'm sorry." You didn't say, "That must have been hard." You just handed her the knife. She held it for a long time and then gave it back. Mothers whisper warnings into ears at bedtime. Be good, or the rat man will come. Leave your shoes out, and he'll fill them with bones. You become a story, a threat, a bedtime shadow. They think it keeps their children in line, but all it does is teach them fear of you, of what you represent. of the truth that no prayer keeps the scratching away. But even so, even with the spit, the curses, the lies, you keep going because you know something they don't. Something the mothers can't say and the children can't understand. That hate is still better than indifference. Hate means they believe you matter, even if they wish you didn't. Once, a mother stopped you in the market. She didn't spit, didn't curse, just looked at you, really looked, and said, "You saved my daughter." You waited for more. She said nothing else, just turned and walked away. That night, you didn't drink, didn't light a candle, didn't write the mark you usually scratch into the doorframe of every house you cleanse. You just sat in silence, let the wind move through you, and for the first time in months, you slept through the night. But those moments are rare. Mostly it's spit, cold glares, cross fingers, salt tossed in your wake. You're an omen, not a man. And maybe that's easier for them. Easier to hate a symbol than mourn a neighbor. Easier to mock a shadow than confront what's chewing its way to the world beneath their feet. Still, the children keep watching. Still, they follow from the alleys, whisper your name, giggle when you turn. And one day, maybe one of them will become you. Maybe not by choice. Maybe by inheritance. A father who dies too soon. A village that needs a cleaner. A girl too clever to be a seamstress. Too poor to be a nun. And when that day comes, you'll leave a trap on their doorstep. Simple, sturdy, well-worn. And if they're smart, they'll know what it means. Because you weren't born to this life either. You just stopped running and picked up the sack when no one else would. The day lies to you. It pretends everything's fine. Sunlight spills on cobblestones like forgiveness. Children laugh in the distance. Chickens cluck in orderly circles. Smoke drifts from chimneys like nothing's wrong. But you know better. You smell the rot behind the warmth. Feel the tremble in the air where sickness waits. Hear the silence where birds no longer sing. And when the sun dips, when it finally admits it can't save anyone, the truth returns. And you wake up, because night is when your work begins. You don't sleep when they do. You rest in fragments. Minutes, not hours. Naps so light you hear every board creak, every wind shift. You know better than to trust the dark. It carries too much, and it whispers. Your senses are sharper after dusk. Your nose flares at the scent of iron, bile, mildew. Your ears catch the soft scrape of claws on stone. You feel the weight of the night pressing against you like a thick, wet blanket. This is when the rats move. Not the lazy, bloated ones who scavenge during the day. No, these are the smart ones. The fast ones. The mothers with litters. The scouts who test the doors and crawl along rafters. They're not scared of torchlight. They've learned to wait for it to pass. You've learned, too, not to chase every sound. Not to swing blindly at shapes in the dark. Not to trust a still room. Stillness is a lie. Stillness is a trap. You've walked into cellars that looked abandoned, only to find dozens of eyes blinking from the corners. Rats watching, waiting. You don't always kill them. Sometimes you just watch back. Let them know you're not afraid. Even when you are, the night smells different in every part of town. By the butcher stall, it smells like dry blood and bone dust. By the church, it smells like wax and old stone. Near the tannery, it smells like hell. But the worst smell, the one that sticks, it's the smell of death when it's trying to hide. It's sweet. People don't expect that. They think it's foul, loud, unmistakable. But early death smells like fruit turned soft, like milk gone thick, like copper on a blade left too long in the rain. You smell it first. Always. There was a time you walked past a bakery and smelled it in the woodpile. You stopped. The owner scolded you, said there was no plague here. said the only thing you'd smell was ash. You didn't argue. You just walked around back, lifted a loose plank, and pulled 3 dead rats from beneath the oven. 2 were bloated. 1 was pregnant. The baker didn't say anything after that. The smell of copper comes at night. 2. Not metal. Blood. Fresh, warm. Human. You smell it sometimes before you knock. Before the screaming starts. Before the weeping begins. You smell it in the alley behind the apothecary. In the stairwells of tenements no one patrols. In the drains that carry more than water. And when you do, you walk slower. You ready your blade. You check your sack. You whisper the names of the ones you've already buried. Because blood calls to blood. And it never comes alone. The torches flicker as you walk. Not because of wind. Because they know. You rest in fragments. Minutes, not hours. Naps so light you hear every board creak, every wind shift. You know better than to trust the dark. It carries too much. And it whispers. Your senses are sharper after dusk. Your nose flares at the scent of iron, bile, mildew. Your ears catch the soft scrape of claws on stone. You feel the weight of the night pressing against you like a thick, wet blanket. This is when the rats move. Not the lazy, bloated ones who scavenge during the day. No, these are the smart ones. The fast ones. The mothers with litters. The scouts who test the doors and crawl along rafters. They're not scared of torchlight. They've learned to wait for it to pass. You've learned, too, not to chase every sound. Not to swing blindly at shapes in the dark. Not to trust a still room. Stillness is a lie. Stillness is a trap. You've walked into cellars that looked abandoned, only to find dozens of eyes blinking from the corners. Rats watching. Waiting. You don't always kill them. Sometimes you just watch back. Let them know you're not afraid. Even when you are, the night smells different in every part of town. By the butcher stall, it smells like dried blood and bone dust. By the church, it smells like wax and old stone. Near the tannery, it smells like hell. But the worst smell, the one that sticks, it's the smell of death when it's trying to hide. It's sweet. People don't expect that. They think it's foul, loud, unmistakable. But early death smells like fruit turned soft, like milk gone thick, like copper on a blade left too long in the rain. You smell it first. Always. There was a time you walked past a bakery and smelled it in the woodpile. You stopped. The owner scolded you, said there was no plague here, said the only thing you'd smell was ash. You didn't argue. You just walked around back, lifted a loose plank, and pulled 3 dead rats from beneath the oven. 2 were bloated. 1 was pregnant. The baker didn't say anything after that. The smell of copper comes at night. 2. Not metal. Blood. Fresh, warm. Human. You smell it sometimes before you knock. Before the screaming starts. Before the weeping begins. You smell it in the alley behind the apothecary. In the stairwells of tenements no one patrols. In the drains that carry more than water. And when you do, you walk slower. You ready your blade. You check your sack. You whisper the names of the ones you've already buried. Because blood calls to blood. And it never comes alone. The torches flicker as you walk. Not because of wind. Because they know. Even fire hesitates around you. You pass under archways where rats cling to the beams. They hiss sometimes. You hiss back. A language neither of you admit to understanding. But it works. You once followed the sound of weeping to a root cellar. Inside, a woman, alone, crouched beside her father's body. She'd boarded the door, blocked the windows, hid the sickness, thought she could wait it out. The rats didn't wait. They came through the roof, chewed through his hands before he even stopped breathing. You lit a lantern. She looked at you like salvation. You weren't, but you were all she had. The night teaches you things. things you won't find in books. It teaches you how many kinds of crying exist. The whimper of a dying child, the dry sob of a man too proud to scream, the keening of a mother who's been silent too long. It teaches you how far sound travels, how silence folds around horror like a blanket. It teaches you that mercy is quiet, swift, unseen. You carry no light unless you have to. Light draws attention. To you, to the traps, to the people you're trying to protect. You work in shadows. You've learned to love them. They hide you, forgive you, let you forget what your hands have done. But sometimes, just sometimes, the night turns on you. The silence grows teeth. The rats don't scatter. The eyes that watch aren't afraid. Those are the nights you pray, not to be saved, to be remembered. Once, in the deep part of winter, you found a nest under the schoolhouse. Dozens of rats, gnawed books, a small pile of children's tea collected, arranged like coins. You cleared them all, burned everything, and when the teacher returned, she thanked the priest, not you. The priest blessed the doorway. You didn't speak. You just placed one small tooth on the altar the next morning. No one ever asked how it got there. You know you've changed. The night didn't just reshape your eyes and ears, it carved your soul. There's less softness in you now, less patience. You speak less, sleep less, feel less, but you still smell everything, even in dreams, especially in dreams. They say dreams reflect your desires. Yours smell like smoke, like bile, like fur. You wake with your hands clenched, mouth dry, nails digging into your palms. And the worst part? Sometimes you're smiling, because even your dreams have accepted what you are. The night is your church now. Its silence is your hymn. Its cold your penance. Its weight your sermon. You walk its aisles with a rat stick in one hand, and a sack that always seems heavier than it should be. You confess to no one. There's no priest brave enough to hear it anyway. But the moon listens, and that's enough. Every night ends the same. You return to your shed, peel off your coat, wash your hands in water that's black by the second rinse. You sit, you breathe, and you wait, because tomorrow night will come. It always does. And when it does, you'll walk again, through alleys, past spit and whispers, under stars that refuse to shine on you. And you'll do the only thing you've ever known how to do. You'll go where the scratching leads. You'll smell the copper, the death, the truth, and you'll carry it, because the night never lies. And you've stopped trying to sleep through it. Sometimes late at night, after the last trap is set, after the last body has been burned, after even the rats have gone silent, you dream, not deep dreams, not the kind with colors or voices or names. These are dry, quiet dreams, like smoke without fire, like footprints in ash. They don't offer peace. They offer possibility. And that's worse. You dream of a world where the rats are gone, truly gone, not hiding, not nesting, not gnawing quietly in the walls of a chapel while the priest preaches mercy. Gone, extinct, erased, eradicated by a hand more final than yours. In the dream, there are no scratching sounds, no need for sacks, no traps, no teeth in the night. People walk through alleys without looking over their shoulders. Children sleep with breadcrumbs on the floor. No one boards up their cellars. And you have nothing to do. You just sit, hands clean, nails short, eyes no longer hunting for movement in shadows. You aren't tired in this dream. You aren't feared. You aren't even remembered. And when you wake up, your hands still smell like lye. The sores on your knuckles still burn. There's always a fresh scratch somewhere on your arm. And the scratching the real kind always starts again. behind a wall, under the bed, inside your head. It doesn't matter where. It always comes back. That's the part they don't understand. The part that keeps you up when the town sleeps. The rats always come back. You kill them. You burn them. You trap them by the dozen. And still they return. New. Smaller. Hungrier. They're patient. Like the plague. Like guilt. Like grief. Every year, someone announces it's over. That the town is clean. That the burials have stopped. That the rats have thinned. And for a moment, just a moment, you want to believe them. You want to walk away. Let the tools rust. Let the sack fall silent. You even try. Sometimes, you leave town for a week. Camp in the woods. Eat meat not poisoned by rot. Wash in streams that don't smell like cellars. But then the wind changes. And you smell it. That copper tang. That sour mildew. That telltale scent of warm, moving bodies with too many teeth. And you go back, because the world may rest. But you know better. Hope is a slow poison. You've swallowed just enough of it over the years to recognize the taste. It starts like sweetness, like the first bite of fruit after winter. And then it curdles. It sours, rots, hollows you out, and you're left with less than before. Less belief. Less joy, less light, just a bitter aftertaste of what almost was. They say every man needs something to believe in. God, love, a future. You used to believe in the idea of clean, not just homes, but hearts. You believed people could learn, that a town might someday change, that children wouldn't have to grow up listening to chewing in the walls. Now you believe in weight, in motion, in cycles. Kill, burn, trap, sleep, repeat. Belief you've learned is a luxury, and you gave that up with your name. Still, the dream returns. Always different, always the same. You're walking down a street with no shadows, no spit in your path, no whispers behind doors. A woman smiles at you. A child waves. Someone says, "It's done. You did it." And you almost believe it. You reach for your sack. But it's empty. Light. You open it. And for the first time, there's nothing inside. Not even memory. Then you wake up. Your hand clenched around a splinter. Your lip bleeding. The sound of something scratching under your cot. You sit up. You reach for the knife. You wait, and when it stops, you don't breathe easy. Because silence doesn't mean safety. Silence means preparation. They're always preparing. You've tried to tell people that the dream isn't real, that the plague doesn't end, that the rats aren't just animals, they're inevitability. But they don't listen. They talk of futures, of healing, of walls strong enough to keep the vermin out. You want to scream. Not because they're wrong, because they're lying to themselves, and because part of you still wants to believe them. That's the worst betrayal. Not theirs, your own, because deep down, under the rot and rust and dry blood, you still dream, still imagine a life where your name isn't muttered like a curse, still wonder what it would be like to be invited in through the front door, to sit, to be fed, to be asked about your day, to be missed. Once, a boy, the same one who followed you for a week, asked, "What would you do if the rats were gone?" You didn't answer at the time, but you thought about it, long into the night. And the truth? You don't know. You've never lived in a world without them. Can't picture one. If the rats were gone, you might be, too. No sack, no stick, no purpose. Just a man with dirty boots and no reason to wear them. Just a man with a story no one wants to hear. Sometimes you think that's the real reason you keep going. Not to protect the town. Not for coins. Not even for duty. But because the rats are the only thing that prove you're real. You kill one. Hold it up. Show the blood. smell the proof, and for a moment, you exist. A world without rats? That's not peace. That's erasure. Still, some nights, just some you sit on the roof of your shed, watching the moon rise like a promise you don't deserve. And you let the dream play out. You imagine the scratching stops. The sacks stay empty. Your hands heal. You imagine someone else carrying the weight. Or no weight at all. You imagine being done. Not dead. Just done. And for a few minutes, it feels real. It feels possible. Then the wind shifts. The smell changes. And you climb back down. Because someone has to. Because dreams don't set traps. And rat-free worlds don't knock on doors. No one remembers the rat catcher. Not in stories. Not in carvings. Not in the songs sung by firelight when the wine runs warm. You're not a figure of legend. Not a martyr. Not a symbol. You're a footnote in a plague ledger. A stain on a street. No one wants to walk twice. When people talk about survival, they don't mention the man who made it possible. They mention miracles. Not the man in the corner with a sack soaked in blood, pulling corpses from the shadows. You've buried more than just rats. You've buried children. You've buried mothers. You've buried the truth time and time again. And what have you left behind? No sons. No students. No statue. Just wounds that festered. Traps that rusted. And bite marks. Scars on your hands. Arms. Legs, even your face. Tiny punctures. Some faded, some fresh. A map of every time you try to hold back the dark, and it bit you. That's your legacy. The rats remember you more than people do. They know the rhythm of your boots. They know the smell of your sack. They know the sting of your traps. The snap of your stick. They run faster when you come. Smarter. They learn. More than the people ever did. You've kept journals. Scraps of parchment, stained and smudged. Lists of nests. Notes on behavior. Diagrams of tunnels no one will ever crawl through again. You try to leave a record. You thought maybe someone would read them one day. Someone would understand. But even as you wrote, you knew the ink would fade. The pages would rot. The rats would chew through them like everything else. Knowledge doesn't matter when no one wants to remember. You once tried to teach a boy. Found him hiding in a broken cart, eating dried apples and watching you from behind cracked wood. He said he wanted to help. You handed him a trap. He dropped it. He didn't flinch when the rat bit him. Didn't cry when it bled. But that night, when the squealing started behind the walls, he left. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't take the bread you left by the door. Just vanished. And you never tried again. Because this isn't a legacy. It's a burden. One you carry so no one else has to. They'll tell stories of knights. Of saints. Of the clever merchant who kept the town safe. But they won't speak of the man who pulled dead things from beneath their beds. The man who smelled like salvation and sewage. The man whose boots left red stains in every alley. When you die, there will be no headstone. No hymns. No weeping crowd. They'll find your body after the smell reaches the road. Maybe they'll burn the shed. Maybe they'll bless it. Maybe they'll bury you behind the tannery, like your father. But even that won't last. Because the rats will come. They always do. And they'll find you, like they found everyone else. You sometimes wonder, what if you'd never picked up the sack? What if you'd walked away? Become a fisherman, a beggar, a thief, anything else? Would you have lasted this long? Would you have been remembered? Would it have mattered? You don't know anymore. All you know is that your hands shake less when they're breaking a rat's spine than when they're trying to hold a pen. The town changes. New names, new buildings, new people who don't remember what the plague smelled like. They forget fast. They build walls. Plant flowers. Pretend the scratching was a bad dream. And they look at you still here, still limping, still carrying that same sack, like a ghost that won't move on. And maybe you are. Maybe the only reason the plague stays gone is because you're still watching, still waiting, still setting traps. But even that won't last. You feel in your bones the slowness, the ache, the cold that doesn't leave. One day you won't wake up. Or maybe you'll walk into a nest that's too big, too deep, too angry, and there'll be no one left to drag you out. They won't remember the quiet way you enter homes, how you never asked for more than what they could give, how you stayed even when they cursed you. They won't remember your name, but the floorboards will, the cellars, the crawl spaces beneath the old chapel. They'll remember the man who walked where no one else dared, who caught what couldn't be reasoned with, who faced hunger with bare hands and didn't flinch. And the rats? They'll remember for a time, until they forget, too, until your scent fades, your traps rot, your shed caves in, and they return, like they always do. That's your legacy, not a monument, not a lineage, not a song, just time bought, a little more light, a little less scratching, for one more year, for one more winter, for one more child to sleep without screaming. And maybe that's enough. Maybe legacy isn't something carved in stone. Maybe it's something left in the silence after the squealing stops. Maybe it's the breath someone takes, not knowing they were saved. Maybe it's the home that stays whole, the bread that isn't chewed through, the child who grows up never knowing why the rats didn't come. Maybe that's your mark. Invisible, but deep. You were never meant to be remembered. You were meant to be necessary. And you were, even if they forget you, even if the world moves on, even if your grave is chewed through, you leave no legacy but bite marks. And that's more than most. One day, the scratching will stop, not because of your traps, not because the town learned, not because the world got better, but because you're gone. There'll be no knock that morning, no weeping child at your doorstep, no smell in the wind to pull you from bed, just stillness, a kind that doesn't ask questions. They'll wait a few days, not long, just long enough to convince themselves you took your tools and left, that you found some other village, some other darkness to fight, that you didn't die alone in your cot, jaw locked, sack open at your feet. But eventually, the smell will reach them. It always does. Someone will break down the door, not the priest, not the guards, maybe a curious child, maybe a brave drunk. They'll find you slumped in your chair, hands stained, fingers curled as if still clutching something, a memory, a sound, a name no one ever asked you for. Your tools will still be there, rusted, familiar, waiting. The sack, the stick, the claw with the broken grip, the map of bite marks across your arms, your only tattoos, the only story you ever had. And around you, silence, but not peace, because even in death, you're a warning, a reminder of what they ignored, what they feared, what they needed. They'll burn your shed. They'll call it cleansing, sanctification, necessary. But really, they'll do it to forget, to bury the shape of you, the smell of you, the memory of the man who walked where light wouldn't. But the scratching, it will come back. Weeks, months, years later. One house at first, then two, then all of them. The rats always wait. They always return. And this time, no one will know what to do. They'll light candles. They'll whisper prayers. They'll build higher walls. But they won't knock on your door, because it's not there. Maybe someone will find one of your traps, buried beneath a floorboard, behind a chimney stone, left under the rotted altar of a chapel you once cleaned in silence. Maybe they'll wonder who placed it there, why it's blood-stained, why it still works. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember, not your name, but your shape, your shadow, the silence you left behind, the space between screams that meant he came, he did his work, he left. And if they're smart, if they're scared enough, if they're desperate enough, they'll become you, not in words, not in pride, but in motion. Sack, stick, trap, quiet, heavy, alone. That's how it continues. That's how it always has. The plague doesn't die. The rats don't vanish. The scratching never ends. It just waits for the next hand, the next back, the next soul willing to carry a weight no one else will touch. That's the truth. That's the legacy. Not glory, not sainthood, just the next man in line, stepping into a world that's forgotten what it owes you. And if you could speak now, from the chair where your breath stopped and your story ended, you wouldn't ask for a song, or a statue, or a grave with flowers. You'd say only this: leave the trap set. They're coming. Be ready, because the scratching never ends. And neither did you.